Hello, and welcome to another Bimbo Bookshelf side quest episode. I'm Britt.
And I'm Sophia. Today we're going to be discussing Halloween, our relationship to it, and bits about its history.
We will also be doing poetry reads from some well known published poets to some of our favorite reader submissions.
And we'll be introducing our upcoming side quest series, Myths as Medicine. I'm so excited that you found these old Jehovah's Witness magazines. I never thought that that's something I'd be excited to see, but they were fucking hilarious.
I
And I think that
know.
would be a good place to start.
Yeah, so to give some context for those of you that weren't in our chat, I broke into a family member's Jehovah's Witness literature closet several moons ago and pocketed some old Jehovah's Witness literature and was looking through it trying to find some Halloween stuff. And we did. And we're going to be linking it in. I should have brought it out. Gosh, I put it up. I forgot that I had it. It kind of highlights the reasons why, or the reasons why they give for not celebrating Halloween, which, if you guys don't know, we've talked about this a little bit before, but Sophia and I grew up Jehovah's Witnesses. And so our history with holidays is a little different than other people's, I think. We just didn't do it.
That we didn't celebrate any of them.
Halloween, especially. Of all the holidays that we didn't celebrate, I think Halloween was the one that I was the most fixated on. I wanted to dress up real bad, and I wanted candy real bad, and I wanted to go terrorizing the neighborhood real bad. And I remember like all the kids coming to school and wearing Halloween costumes, and I just became obsessed with it from such a young age. And I don't think that that ever left me.
Yeah, same. I mean, of all the holidays, it was always the most enticing, the most mysterious, the most like forbidden. And of course, that made it the most interesting. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think with other holidays, there was always like the rationalization that it was in some way pagan or forbidden or whatever. And I definitely understood the connection or the correlation that they tried to draw or claim, but it just was made out to be too cool. And you've listed all the reasons. Plus, I don't know. I think there's something about anytime that you tell someone not to do something, like it just makes it really, really, really enticing.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely the person that touches the stove every time. I just need to know how hot it is, you know? There's definitely that aspect to it, which I feel has made holidays, but specifically Halloween, that much more enticing because it was the worst out of the bunch, according to them, because it was from Satan and it was evil. I actually had a conversation with my mom not too long ago about Halloween because my kids had asked her something. I'm pretty sure they were trying to get her to buy a costume or an accessory that I had already said no to, but she is still not a holiday celebrator. And she just, I mean, it was, I don't know if she listens to this or not, but it was kind of funny to me because she was kind of just like had that look taken back, like, you can't ask me this. Like, I'm not helping you celebrate the Devil's Day. And it just made me giggle. And she, then we were talking about it, and she was just like, it's not that the costumes or the decorations bother me, but it's the idea of communing with the dead and the spirits, the paganism and the witchcraft that, like, it made it feel evil and satanic to her. And I couldn't help but just laugh because as she's saying that, I'm like, yes, paganism, witchcraft, talking to the dead. Like, what? You know what I'm saying? This seems very fun. And I would like to do that. So the costumes, sure, don't get me wrong. I love a Halloween costume. You know what I'm saying? I will get dressed up and go to the party. But it's the communing with the dead and the paganism for me that really is attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would say, as someone who now main vocation is as a tarot reader, they did super hype anything to do with occultism in such a way too that was like also so enticing. And that was a big thing. Like, I found a couple of the images that you had sent me from these Watch Horror or Awake
Yes.
magazines, and they were like, Halloween's horrible roots, masks and costumes, bonfires, trick or treat, and they list all these different like
Bonfires.
pagan, like supposed pagan rites or whatever. But I guess it's like maybe that fact that it seems like there was some kind of ritualistic aspect of it was what was so interesting to me, because one thing about our upbringing that think is definitely true for witnesses or cross culturally is like it's just a very dour kind of like boring religion.
Mm-hmm.
And this all just sounded like a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
This is like from the Awake magazine. It says Halloween, ancient night of terror. It is the last night of October. By the light of the moon, a small group of costume figures move from house to house, stating their demands with dire threats. Guarding some doorsteps are grimacing pumpkin heads, glowing with burning candles, made from human fat. Other doors drip with human blood. It is the night of Samhain, Celtic Lord of the Dead. And I think you sent me this image and it just says metal AF.
Yeah, we'll have to upload that image to the Instagram for everybody. It's
but-
really interesting that that says that, because I was actually reading a little bit of the history of Halloween. And although, like, I think with most traditions, like holidays, big spiritual celebrations or whatever, throughout time, the original meanings and like everything gets changed so much that it's hard to really pin down what's truth from the original. But I was reading something that said, I think that this was from 1933, the year of what they called the Black Halloween, which was like the first time really in Western media that Halloween kind of was talked about publicly. And I guess that a bunch of teenagers went around like flipping cars and causing real destruction and doing a real like trick instead of the trick or treat, which seems to be like a real correlation between when over here in America and the Western world we really started seeing more trick or treaters. It sort of became a thing in the late 30s, early 40s. But what you were saying about hanging dead human flesh from a house and stuff, I didn't read that, but they were saying that people decorated their homes in grotesque things and gross things like intestines and stuff.
Interesting. I know I kind of like we only half-assed the history, at least speaking for myself. I only really half-assed the history. It's something that I've kind of dived into over the years here and there, but I think you hit the nail on the head saying that like there's a lot of different perspectives on history always. And like lately I've definitely been hearing a lot of people who are like making the claim that a lot of the more morbid or memento mori kind of aspects of the holiday were really more Christian to start with, so there's that whole like, was it pagan or was it Christian? And I think that it's kind of cool that we have this like perspective of being able to be both beginners and also just know like it's okay that we don't know everything, because I just think Halloween is such a like huge topic with the history of it. And I think it'll be fun if like maybe this time next year we get to revisit this with a maybe more like studious perspective. But I was also just looking here on the notes about how I feel like maybe this is just a segue to what you wrote here about how the origins of festivals, holidays, and particularly spiritual celebrations do get lost throughout time.
Right.
And especially as different storytelling, as we do as a society, represents to us as people and cultures, I think just the idea that what we say about the holiday really shows how we feel about it and how we regard it. And that's also what you wrote here, was that how it was handed to us and how we hand it off to the next generation. So it got us thinking about like stories about holidays, and also stories, I guess maybe about spookier things.
Yeah, I definitely, like you said, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what it is exactly that we wanted to talk about in this episode, because we talked about the history. It's not something we know an awful lot about because we haven't spent a lot of time researching into it. But upon doing some brief research, there are a lot of great podcasts. There are a lot of great YouTube channels. There are a lot of great there are a lot of great ways out there to find people that know what they're talking about their culture's historical stories behind the holiday. And I kind of felt like trying to learn a bunch of those and then reiterate it wouldn't really do it justice. So the historical part, I feel like, there are some links that I'm going to put probably in the show notes that to some of these channels where you can look at like the different culture celebrations of it throughout the years. But like you said, that what's really interesting to me is the way that we hand things down, which is going to be kind of like a segue to introduce our new series. We are going to be doing a side quest series in season 2 coming up, Myth as Medicine. So taking stories from generation to generation and seeing how they change with time, seeing how one culture's version of a tale can change the whole meaning of a story. And one of the stories that we were going to talk about today is The Finger, or as some of you may know it, The Corpse Bride. The origins of this story, like a lot of folklore, are hard to confirm with certainty, but most of what I could find in regards to the story supports it being originally Jewish folklore. And it's highlighting a point in history where Jewish weddings were frequently attacked, specifically to kill the bride to prevent future childbearing. I did read some other things that said that the life and the subsequent death of the corpse bride is dependent on Jewish law and mythology. It said that with Jewish marriage oath, that she is animated, and with the Jewish courts ruling that she is returned to the arms of death, whatever the intention was of the original story writer, the story itself and its medicinal core has changed a lot over the years. I think a lot of people are familiar with the Corpse Bride movie that Tim Burton did. I think it was a Tim Burton movie.
Yep.
Which is one of the reasons that I picked this story, because I felt like it is a great Halloween story, being that most of us are familiar with the Corpse Bride. And the fact that it is one of those stories that can be translated to mean something different depending on how it's read. So we searched the internet and found what we could to be something close to as close as we could find to the original story. And what we're hoping to do is to read this original story to you guys with in mind the historical context and its origins. Have you think about that and then watch The Corpse Bride. See how the story changes.
The thing that I was just going to say about this was that I love that you did end up kind of going back and finding the particular story that inspired the Corpse Bride, because I've just known for a long time that it was like sort of allegedly inspired by, or I've also seen people say that like Tim Burton appropriated it or whatever, as far as like the story being from Jewish folklore, but I've never really dove deep into that or known what the story that it originated from was. So I'd love to read it if you want to now. Like we could start that.
Yeah, definitely. One more thing I wanted to say about it, based on what you just said, is that I did see quite a lot of that online. People were very displeased with Tim Burton because he was asked about it and basically said that the origins didn't matter to him. He wanted the heart of the story, because I think that he is one of those people who's able to see the soul of a story, the medicine in the story, and take out a meaning and create his own. And that's what he did. His intention wasn't to honor the meaning of their story. It was to, basically appropriate it to a story of his own. Because what else do you call, it gets called plagiarism when I do it in school. You know what I'm saying? People don't like it when I do it, but Tim Burton gets rich.
And yeah, I think I remember a quote where he was like, essentially kind of like, it's to universalize it or whatever, which is like, but I think that how you're framing that is definitely like helpful, and also gives people an opportunity to kind of reflect, maybe.
But that's one thing about storytelling, is that I think that often a lot of these stories come with significant cultural relevance. And that is the part of myth and story that can be medicine. If you listen to the cultural relevance and the soul of the story and what it means, and when it's taken and changed and altered, it changes and alters the meaning of the story, the medicine in the story, and it can take it away from it. I mean,
Mhm.
I've watched The Corpse Bride before I even knew about this story. And I didn't even know that this story's history or anything about that, except for that I listened to it in another book. Clarissa Pinkola Estés, someone we talk about very often, one of our favorite authors. She has a book, or I don't know, is it a book or it's like a lecture series with
The Mother
stories in it?
Night Myths and Stories for Telling or Seeing in the Dark. I think it's sort of like a storytelling series, like it's a sort of lecture series. I don't think that it exists in written form, which is really cool too, because she is someone who really practices like traditions of oral storytelling.
Right. And she's a huge inspiration to us here. And all to say, in that storytelling series, she was the one who originally told, or the place where I originally heard The Corpse Bride as this story. So without further ado,
I love that. All right, let's start. There was once a bridegroom who was traveling with his friends to the next village to be married. As the day was drawing to a close, they made camp under a big tree by the river, just outside his wife's village. They built a fire to heat the stew they had brought with them. The bridegroom's friends brought out the wine, and with singing, music, and laughter, they set about helping him enjoy the last night of his single life.
by the early hours of the morning, the singing had become extremely raucous, and the group were extremely merry. The bridegroom tugged on the arm of his comrade and pointed at one of the twisted roots of the tree. What say you? Does that not look like a finger? Gales of laughter greeted his remarks, and the whole company gathered round. Well, that's what we're here for, isn't it? One of his friends joked. Get the ring on a finger and have it done.
Amid more laughter, the bridegroom pulled from his pocket the gold ring he had bought for his wife and dropped it over the protruding root. Might as well do the thing properly, someone yelled. And laughing along with them, the bridegroom spoke the wedding vow he had learned so carefully to say to his bride. And, encouraged by the cheers and guffaws, he danced the wedding dance 3 times around the root, which looked so like a bony finger with a ring encircling it. In fact, had it twitched?
Yes, the whole crowd stared back in horror as the soil cracked around the finger, and out from the ground burst the corpse bride. She was truly a horrific sight. Her flesh was rotten and maggot eaten, so that in place it had drooped off altogether. Her hair and veil were entangled and filled with worms and beetles, and the stained and tattered remains of her dress hung from her. One of her eyes was entirely gone, and maggots crawled in. Yet the other, with a terrible purpose, she strode forward, and her skeletal mouth opened to rasp her words. I demand my wedding night.
The bridegroom and his friends turned screaming and ran for all they were worth for the safety of the village. There, despite the early hour, the bridegroom banged frantically on the rabbi's door. It was opened quickly, as the rabbi had started early to have his other tasks done in preparation for the wedding. Seeing the bridegroom and his friends, he gestured them in with a welcoming smile. What can I do for you this morning, my sons?
The bridegroom's friends all glanced at him before looking firmly at their toes, and he swallowed hard. Well, the thing is, Rabbi, he began awkwardly, we were having a discussion this morning. Yes, my son? Well, we were wondering about the law and marriage and how, well, if someone were to put a wedding ring on a tree root and say the wedding vow and then dance the wedding dance, and then that root were somehow to turn out to be a finger, uh, Rabbi, would that constitute a legal marriage? The rabbi looked at him closely, nothing his rapid breathing and wide eyes. An interesting set of circumstances. This was an intellectual discussion you were having? Yes, Rabbi. We were just talking, and I'm asking for a friend, really.
At that moment, the rabbi's door crashed open, framing the corpse bride, her tattered gown trailing behind her, still rasping, I demand my wedding night. Ah, said the rabbi, turning his head to address the bridegroom and his friends who were suddenly cowering behind him. Can I assume that this is the friend on whose behalf you are inquiring? The bridegroom hung his head and nodded.
I'm so sorry, Rabbi. There's no need to be sorry to me, my son. However, this is certainly a complex situation and too much for one rabbi to figure out alone. I must ask you, miss, and you, young sirs, to wait on my porch while I send for other rabbis to take counsel.
So the bridegroom and his friends huddled at one end of the open porch, and the corpse bride staggered and rocked at the other as the sun came up and the council of rabbis assembled. They made a remarkable sight, and it wasn't long before news got around, and the bridegroom's betrothed came rushing to the rabbi's house to see if it was true. At the sight of the corpse bride, she turned on him angrily.
What have you done? How could you? All our hopes and all our dreams, how could you? She burst into gut-wrenching sobs, and the bridegroom could only pat her arm and repeat over and over, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry.
Gradually, her sobs quieted, and they sat together in blank silence as the corpse bride shuffled and muttered, and the sun climbed higher and higher in the sky, and still the rabbis debated. At what point one of them stuck his head out the door and asked the bridegroom, When you spoke the wedding vow, did you do so correctly and in its entirety? And under the hopeful gaze of his betrothed, the bridegroom hung his head and replied, Yes, Rabbi, I did.
The rabbi shook his head and went back inside. Sometime later, another rabbi leant out the door and asked, The dance you did, was it definitely the wedding dance? And did you complete the full 3 circuits? And with his betrothed gripping his hand, the bridegroom was forced to reply, Yes, it was. And I did.
The rabbi shook his head sadly and went back inside, and his betrothed began to cry again in a quiet, hopeless way until the third rabbi opened the door and asked, The ring, was it pure gold? And the bridegroom bowed his head in grief and facing his betrothed admitted, It was the one I had chosen for my wife. And the rabbi went back inside, and they waited again until the sun was just past its highest point, when all the rabbis stepped out onto the porch. Everyone stared at them desperately as the village rabbi stepped forward.
It has been a hard decision, he said sternly. But we are agreed that in a situation where someone has placed a golden ring onto a finger, and that man has freely chosen to speak the wedding vow correctly and in its entirety, and that person has also gone on to dance the wedding dance the whole 3 times round, in that situation,
both the corpse bride and the betrothed stood on tiptoe, one in hope, the other in despair. The bridegroom held his breath. Even in that situation, the rabbi continued, the dead can have no hold upon the living. The bridegroom let out his breath as the betrothed broke into a rapturous smile and clung to his arm, and the corpse bride collapsed in a heap before them.
All is lost, she moaned. Everything, all I've ever hoped for, all I've ever dreamed of, all gone, all taken, all gone and no way back. At this, the betrothed let go of her bridegroom's arm and stepped forward to gather the corpse bride into her arms. There, she soothed her. There, I will live the dreams for you. I will find your hopes, and we will never forget.
Gently and lovingly, she carried the corpse bride back to the river bank where the bridegroom and his friends made ready her grave, and the betrothed laid her gently in it. That's it. Give me the dreams and hopes. Let me take them on and rest now. Rest and be at peace. And as the betrothed stroked the corpse bride's hair, the energy slipped gently out of her until only the husk of what was left to return to the ground.
Reading the history on the origin of this story, it seems to me that the intent when the story was created was to bring light to an injustice that the authors or culture saw in their community. And this story was a way to kind of make it appealing to all in a way where you kind of have to search for that meaning. So if you just read this story, The Finger, on its own, and you didn't realize that it was of Jewish origin, and you hadn't realized the history and what people had said about it, then you likely would have never considered that at all, because there's nothing in this story that talks about Judaism or religion. Well, I mean, there's rabbis, but it's not based around the religion. It just that religious figure that was marrying them was in the story. So I don't remember much else about the Corpse Bride movie, but I am interested to take this and find the differences and kind of compare. And I really hope that some of you who either are more familiar with this story than we are, perhaps maybe its origins, or you might have something to add or know about it that we don't, or just someone that is hearing this story for the first time and did go on to watch The Corpse Bride and tell us the differences they saw, please reach out to us and let us know. And we'll plug all the ways that you can reach out to us at the end of the episode and the show notes and all the places that we usually do. But I thought that this was a really great story to kind of introduce the Myth as Medicine series.
Yeah, and a couple things that I want to ping off of that. This was a story that we both found, or that you originally found through Clarissa Pinkola Estés. And we talked a lot about her before in the podcast, but it's definitely, she, I would say, is a big inspiration for why we wanted to go ahead and have this kind of like side quest series, and to be able to just kind of share stories. Like, one of the things that I had in the notes here were that, we recognize that a lot of people do find reading as a challenge, or that they might feel like they struggle to connect with stories that they enjoy. And I like that we've been able to also just note that we can kind of share stories throughout the podcast. I do think that a lot of her work has this oral storytelling component. And even though we talk about books, obviously we're both bookworms in a lot of ways, I really like being able to kind of honor and carry on those traditions and the lineage of oral storytelling. And just kind of even the fact that what comes forward in our paraphrasing or in our perspective or in our ability to research is also its own new story or its own like version of it. And I think that's really cool.
Right. I'm definitely on board with what you were saying there. And to piggyback and talk more about this author, she has another book, Clarissa Pinkola Estés, Women Who Run with the Wolves. And that book is a lot of storytelling and breaking down to see the medicine in the stories. And it was a big inspiration for the series, basically the main inspiration for the series. Originally, I think we were just going to do that book and break down all of the stories in it, but instead are going to look at different stories from different cultures and different backgrounds, different authors. We also want to read some poetry for this episode, some user submitted poetry.
I just noticed, like, when you were talking about the Jewish origins of the story, was kind of trying to do some research to see if I could find anything else to add. And as I was doing that, I found a fun like synchronicity and connection to one of the poems that we're going to read tonight. So it appears that the story for the Corpse Ride was first like I'm so distracted right now by the cat in the window. The story for the Corpse Bride was first kind of put into like a compendium of Jewish folktales that was published in the 16th century, and it was apparently presenting parables and adventures of the Rabbi Isaac Luria. He is one of the most prominent Talmudic scholars of his time. And if that name sounds familiar to any of our listeners, it's because he's also kind of considered the father of modern Kabbalah, which is to say like Jewish mysticism or Jewish mystic philosophy. And that is also just a name that's sort of dropped in one of the poems that we're going to be reading today. So I thought that was a really cool connection.
As girlies in our synchronicities, our first two poems, Fearsome and The Light of the Cross, were submitted to us by Connor Marvin, also known as Merlin's fearsome.workshop on Instagram.
Fearsome. My blood burns oceans while I melt my soul. Spoon and lighter, jack me in, spike me up. I've shot myself into the abyss and come back. Mostly. Changed, strange. We don't force the gates of heaven. We must be invited in. In the time of Isaac Luria, they had 1,000 Ks. For the 1,000 locks on the heart. Me, I've come to smash the fucking locks. Breathe my fume. Dragon's blood, lion's mane, Prometheus roar. Charging up the mountain, heaving from the cigarettes, broken down, crushed up. Give me unsurmountable odds and I'm good to go. God used to be an idea. Now I'm stepping over the corpse of the illusion. Sword, keen, eyes wild, nothing but teeth. The fangs I pulled out are coming back in. Zigzag lightning path. Stuffed an apple into the serpent's mouth like, shut the fuck up. I'm here for the other tree. Hair balled up in my fist. Breathe when I say so. Listen closely for my orders. Spirits swarm around me. Bees scattered in every direction, bringing honey back to the hive. Don't worry about my wounds. I don't need a rest. I need to win. The queen's heart at stake, and I will not hesitate a single step. I'm Plotinus, ranting of light on light on light. I weave through the world like a ray through particles. Observe me, and I'll change. I didn't come here to be understood. I came to understand. Alien to most who are playing a different game. I'm mining for gold in the minefield of my failure and shame. I'm bear hugging the bomb of my heartbreak while everyone else runs in terror. Playing chicken with God under the Bodhi tree, holding a gun to the head of a mushroom, tears streaming, demanding to be taught the cheat codes that unlock love. The prophet's prayer, God, show me reality as it truly is. There's not an ordinary cell in my body. Sorcerous and determined, staring ugly in the face till it taps it out. Spent so much time chewed between the jaws of fate, I slipped down its throat, digested, dissolved, and became it. I can feel destiny in my blood. It's not that I am unstoppable. It's the years I've spent playing target practice for God blew pieces off me that I and you cannot stop the one who moves through me. Someone's got to walk further and further into the ocean while everyone else busies themselves organizing the froth washed up on the shore. I've been perfectly prepared for the task. No one needs to get it. Here's a hint. The ocean is you. The ocean is God. Now I'm a hole and a reed flute that Rumi's breath moves through. God kicks a can down the road. It clatters down the pavement, then comes to a stop, catches its breath. God kicks it again. Every clang and rattle, every scrape and bump, it cries out, why? It protests and bargains, loses hope and makes meaning. But I was going the other way. What a horrific setback, it cries. But God knows. She is shepherding it towards its destination, as every seed through its perfect soil and conditions to grow, through its struggle nobly to survive elsewhere, so is my place beside you. Everything that tried to shut my heart has failed. Crawling through the rubble of my life, I reached a bloodied up hand towards your radiant star. I don't need to tell everything I've survived. I need to lift my heart full of holes up to heaven and demand reinforcements. Send in the angels, the holy love I'm given. Remake this world in its image. There is no other God but you. There is no other God but you.
The light of the cross. Here I am, stretched out on the giblet of Alhalla, raw, open, and bloody. This is the crucifixion. Cannot move my arms or legs. Nailed to the cross of the elements. Complete surrender. vulnerability beyond reason, as the lance is driven into my heart. The blood that pours from me now will fill the grail for 1,000 years. If I can only surrender deeper, if I can only look into the pit of my grief without flinching, it's a curtain, a veil. I can see love rippling the fabric behind it. Buckle by buckle, I've taken off my armor. Inch by inch, I am crossing the sword bridge, a tightrope made of razor wire. Over a raging river, 100 feet below. Do not look down. Look to the beloved on the other shore. By the time I make it to her, I may be stained red like birth, and it will not matter. The many gifts she longs to give me, I open my ribcage to receive them. I only want her wanting. Swim with me, drown me in your perfume well. Praise the world to the angel. The angels only know one taste of God each. While we're here drunk on 1,001 wines, each with a different terror, beg me home, pray me whole, eat my God, closer to you than the pulse to its echo in the jugular vein. I can taste its echo, closer. Back to Golgotha, the cross was fashioned from the tree of knowledge. Adam was buried under the crucifixion. Eva became Ave Maria. Why have you forsaken me? God cries out to himself. I cannot move to protect my heart. I am wide open. You could kill me with a word, and yet you grant me light, God, light. Before the 13th century, cathedrals had small windows. An architect accidentally read a pagan raving, God is light. So he invented flying buttresses, structural support, standing away from the building so the ceilings could vault, the windows could dilate, and the temple of God could fill with herself. 2 months ago, I had thick walls and small windows. I feel my insides rearranged, flayed alive. Baghdad burns around me, and I sing the Quran. Alhalla, Christi Ilson, martyrs of love, buttress me as my bones crack, to make way for more light. One does not reinvent the cathedral for its own sake. Beauty is completed by its appreciation. I make room within me so that you can enter, full of awe and wonder. The light streaming in through my rose windows is for you, that you might pray at this altar and find what you've been looking for. God, make me a cathedral that brings her pilgrimage to completion, that you find within me not only holy song, but shelter, love, rest.
So one of the stories that I had, it's ironic that we both, I guess, had like a Clarissa Pinkola Estés introduced story and kind of perfect. The one that I wanted to do was the Stolen Mother Moon. I've talked about this story maybe on the podcast, maybe not before, but it's one that's always stood out to me, and I have kind of tried to transcribe it, and I'm just going to read what I have. There was this village, a wonderful village, and everything happened just the way it was supposed to happen. And all of the children were terrific, and all of the mothers and fathers loved each other, except, as there always must be in the Psyche and in fairy tales, there was this one thing that was very, very adverse. This beautiful, harmonious village was surrounded by a moat of black, murky bogs. In the dark there always, and it stank because everything was rotting. It was for that reason, and the darkness of those quagmires and quicksand, that the people depended on the light of the moon to guide them at night. Some nights she did not come, and on those nights the bogs were filled with treachery, because there were evil things that lived there. Things that live in the darkest corners of humans' minds would come out at night and lead the poor, struggling travelers with no light into the quagmires and drown them. Well, it turned out that several people died in the course of a very short amount of time. When the Moon Mother learned of this, she was filled with sorrow, for she cared for humans. In fact, she was so concerned that she decided she would come to Earth and see for herself. So when the dark of the month came, she stepped into a slow shooting star and landed at the end of the marshes. She wore a black cape pulled around her so that no light could escape, and for as far as she could see, the bogs were like black mirrors, with a few sparse willows sticking up here and there, and the smell of muck everywhere. Around the bottom of her cape there was a bright rim of light. She saw that, and she pulled her cape even tighter, It was so cold she was trembling, and she feared the evil ones, just as we all do. But she loved the human soul more, and so she began her investigation, guided by the little golden light that leaked through her cape over her beautiful feet. She felt her way through the grass and the ponds and the quagmires, and just as she thought she had a lay of the land, all of a sudden she felt a vine across her ankles, and too late to unhold herself, she began to fall forward. She reached for a twining tree, the kind under the control of evil ones, and as sure as she grabbed its branches, it sent its tendrils around her wrists and her ankles, holding her as though with manacles. And the more she struggled, the tighter it held her, and she was in the blackest of dark, shivering and straining. She heard a voice calling from far off, "Please, help me." She listened, and the cry came nearer and nearer, and she heard footfalls stumbling. At last, by the dim light of the stars, she saw a haggard, despairing face with fearful eyes, and she knew it was a poor soul who had lost their way and was floundering on to their death. And the traveler now caught sight of a glimmer of light from the captive moon, and made his way towards the light, thinking it meant help. But there was a quagmire right in front of the moon. She was filled with sorrow because she was luring him with her tiny little light, luring him to his death. Frantic to warn him, she struggled until her hood fell back, and her dazzling hair lit the black waters. A flood of yellow, precious light of the moon mother glinted, and the whole was as day as bright. How relieved the traveler was to see the evil ones rush back into their underwater holes. But the moon struggled against the branches that held her tighter, and she was so glad he was safe. But the traveler ran to the edge of the marsh so quickly and with such haste and relief that he forgot to wonder about the wondrous thing that had just occurred. And the moon mother sank exhausted into the mud. As she did, her head fell onto her breast, and her hood fell back over her hair, and all became darkness again. And the vile things that love the dark came too then. They came with a kind of whisper chatter. "We'll get her now. We'll get her now. We'll kill her. Yes, we'll kill her." They gathered around the moon mother, snarling and kicking and grasping, and they drove her into the ground, they who hated humans. At last, no more light shone around the dark waters. The one who gave light, and even more, the one who shone down on nursing mothers, the one who made sleeping women kiss their lovers' backs, the one who put words into the dreams of poets, the one was pushed deep into the mud. The evil ones don't care about mothers or babies. They didn't care about lovers or poets. The mother moon let one last light zigzag over the waters before she disappeared completely. And the evil ones rolled a great boulder over her grave and danced a crazy dance on top of it. On nights there was no light to guide, and so many people became lost, and so many children became orphaned, and so many people suffered, that the villagers decided that they must go and find out what became of the moon. Armed with torches and clubs, they trekked through the night into the bog, sinking down into the wet and slimy grass all the way around their knees, and the wet and cold they continued on. The evil things were about and surrounded them, but their flames from their torches kept them safe. And they came to a great boulder, and they said they did not think this boulder was in this place before. There was a little blip of light all the way around it that shone whiter than white, and with great excitement they lifted and they hauled and they tugged until the boulder rolled away. And then, staring down in what seemed to be the most beautiful face they had ever seen, they saw eyes filled with the love of humanity. The light rose up, lighting their faces first from beneath and then straight on, and then finally from the top as the moon mother escaped from her prison and climbed the dark staircase back to the sky, where now, on most nights, she travels across the sky with her hood turned down and her radiant light everywhere. And now, on those few unpredictable nights when she veils herself in gray and does not shine, travelers have learned to stay by the hearth and wait until she shows the way again. think it's from Mother Night Myths and Stories from Seeing in the Dark, but I'm looking and I think it actually is maybe from a different one from her called Warming the Stone Child. And so maybe the version of the story that I just read was a little bit different than the version we both heard, which is, I think, an interesting aspect of like the oral storytelling tradition. This one had more of an emphasis on the moon being stolen and captured, and that the villagers actually come and help her. Whereas the version that I've heard in Mother Night more so emphasizes the struggle of the villagers themselves, but they both have the same, I guess, core kind of message, which is that both the moon and the villagers learn to rely on their own light. The moon doesn't descend to earth and interfere or try to help the humans, and accepts that they can be in the darkness in her absence. And then the humans kind of accept their own need to stay home and tend to their own fire, which is why I've always really liked that story.
Our next poetry submission is from Casey Truglio of Rebel Readers. You can find her on Instagram. Her personal is Casey, Caseyy with AC, and at Rebel Readers Florida. She also has a website, rebelreaders.org. She's doing a lot of great work in Jacksonville in Florida with distributing banned books in free libraries, as well as some other programs, and is out at events. And this is Intrusive Thoughts by Casey Truglio. I could eat this right now, I mutter aloud to myself as I stare manically into the dancing flame of a long dinner candle. It's now just a nub. What could be the harm? I have fleeting thoughts, disturbing ones in my flesh burning, the fat on my face melting, liquefying, dripping, falling. Will my mouth burn if I ate the flame? Or would my saliva extinguish the flame before it disfigured me? If it did burn my mouth, would I be able to smell my flesh burning, fat melting, liquefying, feel it dripping, falling? I want to find out, but I don't want to scare my friends. I'll have to try it another time.
I'm so appreciative of the poetry submissions that we've gotten. They're so dynamic and also so vulnerable in a lot of ways. So that's just awesome.
I think it takes a lot of courage to put your art out there, but poetry is such a beautiful way to connect with people. And one of my favorite poets is Miss Sylvia Plath. And I did pull one of her poems for this episode, and then I'm going to read for you guys now. This is called Mad Girl's Love Song by Sylvia Plath. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I lift my lids and all is born again. I think I made you up inside my head. The stars go waltzing out in blue and red, and arbitrary blackness scallops in. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I dream that you bewitched me into bed and sung me moonstruck, kissed me quite insane. I think I made you up inside my head. God topples from the sky, hell's fire fades. Exit seraphim and Satan's men. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I fancied you'd return the way you said, but I grow old and I forget your name. I think I made you up inside my head. I should have loved a thunderbird instead. At least when spring comes, they roar back again. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I think I made you up inside my head. We love a sad girl. You know what I'm saying? We love, woe is me. Because same. You know what I'm saying, Sylvia? Same.
I love this other poem that you had from Fadwa Tuqan. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but a Palestinian poet who is considered one of the best contemporary Arab poets and someone who's new to me. So I really appreciated seeing this. I was going to read Enough for me to die on her earth, be buried in her, to melt and vanish into her soil, then sprout forth as a flower, played with by a child from my country. Enough for me to remain in my country's embrace, to be in her close as a handful of dust, a spring of grass, a flower.
This poet was also new to me. I will say that I did specifically take time to look up Palestinian poets to see whose voices we could amplify And I was really inspired by some poetry, some very sad war poetry that I had read online recently, and really wanted to center some of their voices. This is another poet who is also a published poet, but was new to me as well, another Palestinian writer. This is from Rawan Hussein. I hope that I'm saying that correctly. It was translated by someone named Fadi Juhua, and the poem is called Dawn. Dawn broke on our heads. Endings were cut down to size. Our little one's feet rapidly turned toward the sky. Time set itself aside, and places shut their eyes, like a child with words that gray behind her lid. Ceilings tumbled, waterfalls of stone, and under the rubble, the last perceived image hangs. A final painting sculpted on our faces. Alone we grow old tonight. Weave hours and wear them. Gobble the terror that runs down our kids' mouths. Who will devour our rusted lips?
And we're going to end this episode here with that reading, as it feels the most important to us at this time. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and will reach out to us with your feedback. Join us again soon for our next episode, Part 2 of Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, with our first guest speaker, Mr. Don Owens. You can reach out to us via Instagram at Bimbo Bookshelf or by email at bimbobookshelf@gmail.com. If you did enjoy today's episode, or even if you didn't but you still somehow made it this far, please feel free to give us a 5-star review. It helps us recruit the others. Until next time.